Thank you, everyone, for joining the Nystrand Center of Excellence in Education, the first installment of the Nystrand series for the 21-22 school year. I'd like to now turn it over to Dr. Meg Hancock, who's Associate Dean of Academic Services.
Thank you, Dr. Stark. And I'd like to take a moment to welcome everyone to the first event of our 21-22 academic year. Before we get started with our panel, I wanted to share a little bit with you about the Nystrand Center for Excellence in Education. Transformation through collaboration. The Nystrand Center of Excellence in Education is dedicated to the continual support of educational excellence for all students, made possible through innovative thinking, transformational educator preparation, professional development, and supportive learning environments. The Nystrand Center supports and facilitates education reform through its outstanding special programs and initiatives. Strong community partnerships are absolutely the heart of our success and serve as an inspiration for those who work so diligently to provide a better education for our children. It's our mission to continue with transformation through collaboration by leading the discussion on education reform policy and research and practice. And certainly we're going to engage in some really important conversation today about the mental health and wellness of our students, K-12, as well as in higher education. And before we get to our panelists, I want to make sure you've heard from Geneva just very briefly, but I do want to take a moment to introduce Dr. Geneva Stark, who is the director of the Nystrand Center of Excellence in Education and clinical assistant professor in educational leadership, evaluation, and organizational development. Geneva joined us on March 16th, 2020. So if you remember that date, and it's likely seared in a lot of our minds, that was either right before or the day after the state essentially shut down due to COVID-19. And certainly this conversation today about mental health is exceptionally poignant, as we know COVID has exacerbated a lot of the mental health and wellness challenges that our students face, certainly by virtue of being in isolation or in their homes, away from their peers, all kinds of things. And I'm sure that we'll have an opportunity to talk about that in a little bit. But Dr. Stark comes to us from Jefferson County Public Schools, where she most recently served as a diversity, equity, and poverty administrator. Prior to this role, Dr. Stark served in JCPS as a district coordinator and human resource administrator, principal, and assistant principal. In addition, Dr. Stark was a KDE, Kentucky Association of School Administrators Superintendent Fellow, former president of Kentucky Association of Secondary School Principals. Dr. Stark is a noted educator, thought leader, and frequent presenter on diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as implicit bias. Her community leadership is also impressive, which is another reason we selected her to lead the Nystrand Center. She serves on the National Alliance of Black School Educators Board of Directors, a member of the League of Women Voters, the NAACP, the National Council of Negro Women, and is the former president of the Greater Louisville Alliance of Black School Educators. Dr. Stark is also a member of Senator Gerald Neal's African American Initiative. She is a volunteer for the Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals. Ooh, that's neat. I didn't know that. And Dr. Stark holds a PhD in educational leadership and policy from U of L, which is very exciting. So certainly, while Dr. Stark has a number of professional accolades, I think that she would agree, serving as a mentor to students, teachers, support staff, and administrators in JCPS, both locally, statewide, and nationally, certainly one of her greatest accomplishments. She is a true champion for education and is looking forward to leveraging her knowledge, experiences as a K-12 educator, collaborator, motivator, team builder, and diversity consultant to focus on taking the Nystrand Center to the next level. And I'm very grateful to have Dr. Stark as a thought partner and a member of our college. Dr. Stark, I'll turn the panel over to you.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Hancock. I think I'm going to need you in the future. Good job. But hey, thank you all for being here, and thank the panelists. But more importantly, as we talk about mental health, and right now, the climate and culture in our country is unbelievable for many people. We all know that. And when we talk about pandemics, many people think we're dealing with one pandemic, but we're dealing with multiple pandemics. We're talking about not only COVID-19, where we have more than 600,000 people who are no longer with us. And when I say that 600,000 people, I want you to know that that's not just a number. That's somebody's mother, father, sister, brother. That's somebody's family member, because we get caught up with just a number. It's not just a number. It is a person, a human being that matter in this country who's no longer here because of COVID-19. And we're dealing with racism and social justice that continue to be on the forefront every day in our lives. And we continue to be, I guess, amazed and almost like speechless with the things that continues to happen in our country. We're talking about the educational disparities that exist, In Kentucky, last year was ranked one of the 10 worst states in terms of access and opportunities in this country. And I found out that Kentucky, for 3 years running, had the most students who were abused and suffered abuse in this country. And we, as a state, have been at the top of that list for 3 years running. And so you think about those students who have been home for the last 18 months, the impact that it's had on them. Then we talk about economic disparities that exist, because many people have lost income as a result, of COVID-19. Then we talk about voter suppression, that we have individuals that's trying to make sure that we do not have a right to vote, trying to take back the time more than 50 years. Then we have an insurrection that happened on January the 6th. That's still a topic of conversation. When there was election in November the 3rd, and we have an insurrection 2 months later. And then you have many individuals that saying that, oh, it was just people peacefully walking through the Capitol. So then we also talk about diversity, equity, inclusion versus CRT. That's been a topic of conversation. So we're talking about that we no longer want the history of our country to truly be taught. Because for years, as we know, that all of our history has not been taught. It has been eliminated from the history books. And now, because COVID-19 allowed many people in this country to stop and see and pause when they saw George Floyd, when they saw Breonna Taylor, when they saw Ahmaud Arbery, when they saw the different things that was happening in this country. Because many times we just on the go, we just moving. And so they had their time to stop and pause to see, oh my goodness, is this happening in our country? Yes, the United States of America, land of the free and home of the brave. Then we talking about immigration concerns, the attacks on Asians, the LGBTQ community. We talking about gun violence that continue to rise every day. Now we have Afghanistan, we have Haiti. So when we talk about collectively, all of these things that's happening right now in our country, mental health is real. We tell individuals not just take care of your physical health, but also take care of your mental health. So this is timely that we talk about this, because all too often it's like, shh, we don't want to talk about it, or, you have to be crazy to see a counselor. We need to talk about it because we are seeing what's happening in our country when we talk about the mass shootings, when people just wake up mad and wake up angry and they don't know why. So today we have two panelists that's going to be speaking about mental health, K-12 and higher education, and just across the board, period, because we have some real issues in our country that we need to address. And our first panelist is Dr. Diane Currington, a former K-12 health and physical education teacher that has recently transferred her skills into higher education as an adjunct professor at Bellarmine University. Dr. Currington explores inclusion and diversity for people of color and students of color with a trauma-informed care lens through scholarship and advocacy work. She earned a PhD from Bellarmine University in education and social change, a master's degree in public health, and a master's in special education from Kentucky State University. In addition, Dr. Currington serves on the board for both Louisville Girls Leadership and the Home of the Innocents within the Louisville community. And again, we're talking about someone who has a passion and commitment to the work that needs to be done, because we can't sit by and do nothing, because silence means consent, and we cannot afford to be silent today. Then we have Ms. Shannon Floyd, who's a conscientious disruptor, a life coach, seer, and answer seeking a problem, author, seeker of truth. Her natural curiosity about the story behind a person, place, or thing has been a guiding force in helping others and organizations to identify problems, form plausible solutions, establish goals, and create designed change. Shannon holds a bachelor's degree in sociology and master's of science in social work, the field of social work, and licensed as a certified social worker, and is actively pursuing independent licensure. Currently, Shannon is a mental and wellness coordinator with the College of Education and Human Development here at the University of Louisville. Principal mediator for Resolve Restorative Practices, LLC. Shannon has spent decades in the trenches of juvenile justice, public secondary education, community mental health, social services, developing and administering programming and services to combat gross systemic inequities. And we know there are many of them. As a fierce advocate, Shannon actively collaborates with policymakers and power holders in combating implicit bias, discriminatory practices, and inequities in the labor market. Her commitment to influencing legislation beneficial to the least of these is unwavering. And in today's world, we have to be unapologetic. We cannot afford to sit in silence. And I believe that we all can do something in the spaces and places that we occupy. So without further ado, we're going to turn it over to our panelists, because I'm excited about the work that they have done and that their presentation, because they're going to leave you with some strategies to take away with. And we expect you to do something with those strategies as well. Dr. Currington.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for showing up today. I will share my screen before we start. Today, I am going to be talking about my research, and my research focused on K-12 education and higher ed and how to support our students of color within these institutions. A little bit about me and my position is I'm a Black woman, I'm an educator. I had an adverse childhood score of 4 or more, which means 4 or more traumatic events during my childhood. Racial trauma, I experienced racial trauma in K-12 education, and I graduated from a historically Black college and university. So my research was around highlighting the lived experience of racial or traumatic experience for students of color in K-12 through storytelling. I believe that there is power in storytelling, and throughout the literature, I realized that these stories hadn't been told. And so I wanted to be the person to tell them. I also looked at historically Black colleges and how they provide a healing space for students in K-12 education after experiencing those traumatic experiences. Throughout my dissertation, I would like to highlight that I use Black and Brown artists, whether it was musicians or poets or song titles, just to uplift the Black and Brown community. That was very important to me. As we know, and as Dr. Starks has already discussed, that we know that Black and Brown students have harsher discipline. We know that racism affects them, student-teacher relationship, and we know that schools oftentimes re-traumatize our students, and our students come to school with traumatic events already. So before I start, some of my stories were really hard to process for me as a researcher. And so I will take my time to pause and take deep breaths. I just want to remind you, if you need to step away and take a deep breath as well, please do so, because some of these stories are hard. If you are in the service of public service, it's hard to hear and deal with. So the title, one of the themes were the deepest wellness, and it talks about adverse childhood experience, which means it's a traumatic experience during your childhood. And so this talks about traumatic experiences that the students come to K-12 with. And so one of my participants, Underdog, says, I was raised by my dad and dealing with the fear of, dealing with the fear of my dad maybe getting killed by these white people in the small town that didn't want him to challenge him. So one of the artists that my dad worked with had gotten murdered. I had nightmares about it all the time. And it kind of brought me to a place of, what if something happened to me? And so Underdog's experience was, they were being raised by their dad, their biological father. Their biological mother was not present. And they understood from an early age what racism was. And their dad was a huge advocate in the community and fighting for Black and brown people. But Underdog was really scared about becoming an orphan due to their dad being in the community advocating. Another participant, Family Reunion, said, I feel like school should have been a safe haven, or I wanted it to be my safe haven at the time, just because I went through some sexual trauma at that age as well. So for me, school should have been a safe haven at that point, you know? And so Family Reunion was part of a military family, and they moved around a lot. And it was hard to make friends. It was hard to connect with teachers. But Family Reunion also expressed that teachers did not try to connect with them as a Black student. They did not try to incorporate the class and making them feel safe either. And so it was just hard to deal with the trauma outside of school and also being traumatized within school. Family Reunion also said that some of the children told them that they couldn't invite them to birthday parties or invite them anywhere outside of school because they were Black. The Hate U Give talks about the misuse of power or power dynamics within our school systems. And so the Cure talked about, my traumatic experience was one day in second grade. I had to use the restroom and she would not let me go. So I had to use the restroom really bad. And I'm telling her, I'm trying to convince her that I don't have to go play in the restroom. I have to use the restroom. She refused to let me go. We were doing body art. We had to lay on this long paper, the long construction paper, trace your body. I pooped on myself while laying on this construction paper, getting my body traced by my classmates. Some of my classmates seen what happened, and they knew due to the history of me and the teacher. Because again, I was labeled as a troublemaking kid, but that was torment. The Cure talked about one time them and another classmate was playing in the restroom, and that forever was used against them throughout the year. And so the Cure had to go home on the bus that way as well. Research has shown that as early as preschool, Black males are considered mischievous, troublemakers, always looking to get into stuff. And so this was an example of the Cure explaining what happened to them in second grade. My participants was between the ages of 25 and 45, and they still remember this event from second grade. Another misuse of power is, I do not know if it was more than my emotions. I felt where I was really wronged by a teacher. Was I was in high school, I was very, very into science. The science fair project came up and we won first place. for the fall semester, but had to get to the spring semester. And then we could qualify for the next one. My science teacher, who was a white female, allowed other students to replicate my project. She actually gave them what we had because they replicated it. It kicked us out of the running. I was devastated. Why would you even allow them to do that? And of course, those students were white. And so Underdog talked about just working really hard and really loved science, was really excited about science. And to be kicked out of a competition that they were really excited about, it made them devastated. And so remember, if we go back to Underdog before, Underdog comes into the classroom with being raised by just their biological father, biological mother was not active in their life. So these are things that are happening both inside and outside of school. This talks about the biases that oftentimes happens within our K-12 education or even higher ed. And so Complexion talked about a negative experience for me was, I would say, was third grade. For some reason, my teacher hated me. I was the smartest kid in the class, but she hated me for whatever reason. I just remembered this one incident where we were learning cursive. I had a problem with writing M's. I have a M in my name. She made the class quiet down and had me go to the front of the class to the blackboard. I told you my cursives were terrible. So when I'm writing my M's, instead of correcting me or at least teaching me like she should have been doing, my teacher, pointed at me and was laughing. And so Complexion also talked about within their interview that they were silent and they did not find their voice until they were able to get to college, which was this HBCU, which allowed them to grow and nurture and support them emotionally, mentally. Keep Your Head, I talked about how a teacher was talking bad to them, using labels to describe them. I was told I'm not worth two dead flies. I mean, during that time, I was devastated because, it's coming from somebody who, who's supposed to be there to, mold and educate you, but then, always the social aspects, because now, you're being told that in front of your class and always got the class clown and they're sitting there cracking up, laughing, two dead flies. I had at the time, I was devastated and, didn't know what to say, didn't know how to feel. And so Keep Your Head also explained that they had parental involvement. And so they were able to go home and talk to their parent about what happened. And so their dad and their uncle came up to the school to talk to the teacher about what happened. And the police was called on two Black men for advocating for their son. And so there's just multiple layers within K-12 education when it comes to labels and racism. This talks about just financial hardship, financial assistance, lack of resources. Rise Up talked about the first time I felt shame. I forgot that it happened. It was more traumatizing. I forgot it happened. I started to go to a new school in third grade. I didn't start the first day. I think I might have started 2 weeks or something. My mother didn't have money for supplies in a backpack. She gave me a whole bunch of school supplies in a plastic bag. I had to walk into class with these plastic bags that I had all my supplies in. It was time to leave and I had to take all my stuff home. I had to reach into my desk and pull out those plastic bags again. That was a pretty bad experience, but no shame to my mother. She was making a way out of no way. And so Rise Up at the time outside of school was also experiencing their parents separating. So their mom just became a single mom, learning how to manage on their own and still trying to provide for the student. And so also what was unique about Rise Up was they were well behaved and quiet, but silently they suffered from the things at home and things in school, oftentimes bullied, and because they didn't make trouble or have any issues, the teacher never checked in with the student. What's going on talked about, my first thought was it was very odd just based on the behavior somehow. I ended up over there with those students who I know now as a teacher, looking back on things, was the students who couldn't read, who were in special education classes, student who hadn't passed their proficiency. Eventually I got moved. You need to be taking advanced honor courses. And all of a sudden I ended up being sent to these rooms with these kids. I always thought it was funny because I graduated number 3 in my class. They would have had a Black boy be number 1 for the first time ever. They decided to put those weights in and it knocked me out because I didn't have access to those courses my first years. It's not like I had a parent who would have known that and said, why my child is not taking advanced courses and things. She sent me to school. As long as nobody called, she never checked on anything. She wouldn't have known that, was a thing. And so what's going on talked about how because of their behavior, they were put in special education classes. And so they weren't even allowed to take honor classes for the first 2 years of high school, which also put them behind with being number 1 in their class. Also, as a Black female, because there was a boy for the first time being recognized within the school, they placed some other things in place to allow this female not even to be considered as being first in her class. And so this just talks a lot about a school tracks and how how K-12 education place students in these tracks that are sometimes not beneficial at all. The last theme talked about how important representation is and how important mentorship is and how beneficial it is to have a supporting environment for a student of color. Respect said my high school career was being in like the Black history class at school. There was one history teacher that was Black and he was very like pro-Black, just like finding comfort within his class. And then his wife also worked at the school as well, being able to talk to both of them about like what happened at school, the different disciplinary action, and then being able to do certain clubs and everything. They were like a source of comfort and shelter within the school. I think just being able to talk to other people that have reached high places or are reaching towards those places, being able to just talk to other peers that have experienced some racial trauma within the school and talking about how we combat slowly and together, I will say that has helped a lot. And so Respect talked about like just being able to share their lived experience with somebody else who look like them and who support them, and also nurtures them and teaches them how to deal with this within the systems that weren't developed to support Black and Brown students. Conqueror talked about, I danced, I ran track, I joined a lot of organizations, so I didn't have to think about what I have experienced or what I was going through or anything of that nature. My household was not, let's talk about how your day was. Nobody talked, no one communicate. A mentor group in high school called Project Butterfly, they helped. It was kind of a group of therapy for young women who in foster care, helped to mold us into women or tried to. It was the best experience of my life. And so Conqueror's situation was they were being raised by their maternal grandparents. Their biological parents were not involved. They were actually on drugs, substance abuse. And so Conqueror struggled a little bit in school, and oftentimes teachers thought that they were being defiant. They had an attitude, they were being negative. But Conqueror talked about how that was a defense mechanism and a survival technique to just survive everyday life. And so this just talks about being able to find a sense of belonging and engagement and just being able to thrive instead of surviving within K-12 education. So some of the next steps I suggest is there's value in student voice, right? Oftentimes we make these decisions without including students. I also think that it's very important for parents to start having conversation, or a role model or a trusted adult in your life to start having conversation with these students to see what their experience is actually at school. I challenge educators to or anyone working in public service with students to start getting involved and coming from a place of empathy and compassion and not being afraid to challenge the systems which weren't built for these students and support them. I think the next steps also is there's partnerships and relationships. I think there's value in building relationships with your students. And that's as simple as good morning, how are you feeling? Or if you were to rank your emotion by the weather, what would it be? Those things are very important when reaching your students. Partnerships can be anything in their community, starting to be a part of their community outside of school, and finding services to support these students. Also to check your biases, and that is for all of us, right? We all go into these educational institutions with biases, and we need to check them and figure out how to deal with them. And also, as educators, deal with our own trauma. Sometimes students re-trigger us, and it causes disrupt in our being able to teach and love and care for our students. So I think it's very important to start to think about things and process these things when it comes to our students. That is all I have. Wait, Dr. Starks, I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I want to say thank you, for that, because you're talking about student voice, and those individuals, as you indicated, were in their 40s. But when you ask them those questions, it's almost as if it happened yesterday, because it stays with them for the rest of their lives. And we need to know and understand that. And also for many of us, someone may have said something to us, and we remember as if it was yesterday. And we all have that. So we have to be mindful of the triggers. What are the triggers and what happens with that? But also know that our students are dealing with a lot of this. And also for us, what is our passion? What is our commitment? And why are we in this business? And are we still there? Do we still have the passion and commitment 3 years later, 5 years later, 10, 15, 20? Do we still have that same passion and commitment to the work? So thank you very, very much for that. And
I challenge one more thing. I challenge higher ed too, right? We oftentimes at these students come from K-12 and they bring those same traumatic racial experience with them into higher ed. And so what are we doing to support them when they are in our institution? And so I challenge us to do better.
Thank you very much. And Shannon is going to speak to, that's her business in higher education now, as well as in the multiple experiences. So she brings all of that with her. So Shannon, thank you for joining us. Truly looking forward to this. Yes.
Good evening. Hello, everyone. I'm going to ask everyone to do something that's unheard of in this medium. I need to see your face. Can I see some faces?
Well, I think for many of this, we are on a webinar kind of situation. So
I can't see any faces.
Well, Brandon, is it an opportunity to be able to see some faces? Can we shift?
I don't think so.
Okay.
We basically have to make everybody a panelist, I believe.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay, that's okay. I'll just move forward. Okay, and the reason why.
If we can do it, then let's give her what she wants. If it's possible.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I asked to see your faces because I'm a conversationalist. I need to see faces. I'm a mental health and wellness coordinator. I believe in the therapeutic process, and I believe with all of our technology and our advances, there's something lacking. And it's becoming slowly but surely a mental health crisis. Does that make sense? So I wanted to ask the question, and please, you all put your answers in the chat. How do you respond when you're cut? Like when you have a physical cut or a scrape, how do you respond? Put your responses in the chat. Like right now. Okay. Fight or flight. I cuss sometimes. You bleed, you fight, you put a Band-Aid on it, you say ouch, and withdraw the area that was cut. I scream. Okay. Normal responses or whatever. Typically, I mean, your average person, they may ignore a cut unless it's deep enough or unless it hurts enough. We might just kind of, wash it off, peroxide or some warm soapy water or whatever. Apply a little antibiotic ointment such as Neosporin, which is a staple in my cabinet. And then we may cover the wound or the scratch or the cut with a Band-Aid. Seek, medical assistance if it's deep enough or if it hurts us enough. If it's painful enough, what you gonna do? You're going to immediate care. You're going to urgent care. When it's something beyond your capability, you seek higher or greater help. Okay. And so like when we are cut, all kinds of things happen in our bodies chemically when we are cut. Does anybody want to add to, again, put your comments in the chat. What happens when we are cut? Like within our body, what happens? Because there's a process. Depends on how deep the wound is. What happens in our body chemically when we are cut? See, this is why I need to see your faces. Body sends cells to heal. The body coagulates, heart rate increases. All of this is true. Like blood cells come together. They're called clotters. I just learned all this earlier today. I knew some stuff was happening, but I'm trying to keep it sharp for you all. So these blood cells come together to clot the blood or whatever, to kind of like cover the wound or whatever, to stop the bleeding, to prevent blood loss and more damage to the body. Okay. Neatest process ever or whatever. Keep in mind that our skin is our body's largest organ, and it is the first or the front line of defense, our skin. So anytime the skin is penetrated, it's trauma to the body. Do you all get that? Anytime the skin is cut or penetrated or punctured, it's trauma to the body. Okay? So potentially life-threatening bacteria can enter the body through a minor cut left untreated. Does that make sense? Bacteria can enter the body, right, through a minor cut that we think nothing about. However, if it's left untreated, can cause major damage in and throughout your body, because the blood carries that bacteria to all different kinds of areas of your body. Then we become sick. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm saying all this to say, if we respond this way to our physical bodies, like when something happens to us physically, if we hurt bad enough, right? Or if the wound is deep enough, we seek help, right? Why don't we do that when it comes to mental health? I wish I could see your faces. Why don't we do it? Why don't we respond in the same way? Why do we ignore it? Why do we dismiss it? Because it's causing the same kind of trauma. Keep this in mind, okay? An amazing fact. The brain does not distinguish between physical and emotional pain. It responds in the same way. Did you all hear that? The brain does not distinguish between physical and emotional pain. It responds in the same way. Okay. So there are chemical processes going on, whether it be a physical wound or a mental or emotional wound. Okay, so let's talk about words. Like the biggest lie that we were ever told, or that I was ever told in childhood was, you know it, put it in the chat, sticks and stones may break my bones, but what? Words will never hurt me. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will, that's a lie. That's a lie, because words do impact us. They wound us mentally and emotionally. Imagine being told by your father as a child. This is not me, this was my dad. Imagine being told by your father as a child, you will never be anything. To his dying day, he carried that wound, and that wound festered and infected his whole entire life. The choices and the decisions he made to try to escape that wound, or the pain of that wound. Does that make sense? Are you all hearing me? When we're talking about mental and emotional health and why we ignore that part. Okay. I wish I could see you. So
the opportunity to put on it to.
That's okay. That's neither here nor there. I'm gonna push forward or whatever. So let's talk about what happens to the body when we get stressed. What happens to the body when we're anxious? What happens to the body physically when someone's words or actions cause emotional pain, distress, or just stress? Okay, so there's a chemical process that's going on. It's called the stress response activation. Now, Dr. Currington touched on it when she mentioned ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Okay, same almost kind of process in how our body responds to trauma. And I'm not talking about just physical trauma. I'm talking about mental and emotional trauma, things that people say or do or don't say and don't do. So it puts us in fight or flight mode. So all kind of hormones are being released in our body, preparing us. Again, the brain doesn't distinguish between physical and emotional pain. The brain doesn't distinguish between a perceived threat or an actual threat. The brain's response is simply to get you out of the situation you're in. So all of these hormones and chemicals are released in your body, preparing you to run or to fight, okay? To get to safety as quickly as possible. So everything in your body is amped up. So imagine a kid, right? A kid who's in school, or imagine a young adult in college who has lived the whole of their lives under stress and pressure. Maybe there's violence in the home, maybe there are housing insecurities or food insecurities. They're constantly moving. Imagine that stress response activation. After a point, it doesn't turn off. It stays on stuck because the whole of your life has been lived in those kinds of experiences. So it's hard for you to calm and settle yourself down. Keep in mind, when you're in the stress response activation, you can't concentrate. There is no way you can concentrate. Everything in your body is preparing you to fight or to run. You can't focus. Imagine a kid in class, or imagine a young adult in class trying to concentrate with this baggage on them, totally and completely unaware of what's actually happening and going on in their bodies. When you have that young adult who's like, even in their stance, they're very tense. They're already in fight or flight without even realizing it. When they're talking about, I'm just a little worried about, and the stiffness comes, I already know where you're at because I see it in your body. Does that make sense? So imagine someone trying to sit in class and concentrate. But by the same token, you really don't think you need to see a therapist. You know why you don't think you need to see a therapist? Because that's normal to you. That's what's familiar to you. Does that make sense? So you're comfortable with it. You don't know how to exist outside of that. Okay? And when you're in that mode, you're in survivor mode. Okay? And when you're in survivor mode, your focus becomes very streamlined. You're not thinking about anything else but other than what you're trying to survive. A lot of this happens on a subconscious level. That is the importance of mental health, seeking therapeutic services. Is it perfect? No. Do you have good and bad therapists? Absolutely. You have good and bad teachers. You have good and bad doctors, right? You have sucky attorneys. That's all across the professional board. But when you find the therapist that fits you and you fit them, it's gold. It's gold. And I believe that a good therapist, the only thing that a good therapist really does is actively listen to you. Someone who is actively engaged helps you to navigate through pain and trauma and questions and confusion, but also pulls out answers you already have, but you don't know it. Does that make sense? That's all therapy is. That's all my therapy is. How about that? That's how I do it. Okay? Someone just to help you to navigate some of the terrain of your life and point out what you already know, but you don't know that you know that. Okay? Therapy is a conversation. It's an honest conversation. I'm amazed by the number of people that lie to me. Like, what can I do to you? Nothing. I mean, I want to say it was Dr. Field. I heard Dr. Field say this years and years ago. You know, you can't cure what you won't admit. I mean, you can't fix a lie. I mean, once you tell the truth, you're honest, you're vulnerable, that's where the real work begins. Does that make sense? That's the importance of mental health. Listen, if you're not stable mentally and emotionally, you're unstable in every other area of your life, because one area of your mental and your emotional state left untreated, like physically, okay, it sets up infection in your body. It affects other areas of your life. Let me read this real quick. Okay, according to, and it's just because I always forget this acronym. You know, our lives are now filled with acronyms and PIN numbers and yeah. So, according to, when I find it, and it's in my notes, I'm not as savvy as Dr. Courington when it comes to the PowerPoint. Okay, according to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, there are 8 dimensions to wellness, okay? Emotional, spiritual, intellectual, physical, environmental, financial, occupational, and social. If any one of those areas has imbalance, you're imbalanced. You can dismiss it, you can ignore it, but I promise you, it will infect your entire system, just like a cut. Okay, when you ignore it and you dismiss it, you leave it untreated, bacteria gets in. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is what I say. This is what I say. I say, it's so easy. It's such a cliche. Take care of yourself. I'm saying take care of yourself to a large number of people who don't know how to take care of themselves. So that's where it comes up, a self-care plan. And the self-care plan falls in those different areas I just mentioned, those 8 dimensions to wellness. And it outlines, and I'll send something to Dr. Stark So if anybody's interested in that self-care plan, you can access it through her. And it just has you to outline within each area what you need to do to be stable in that particular area, such as financially, okay? If there's an imbalance in that area, maybe it requires that you save a certain amount of money or you pay off certain bills, okay? When it comes to occupational well-being, maybe that means you seek alternate employment. Maybe it means you start pursuing your real dreams, okay? Career goals and dreams and aspirations. Does everybody get what I'm saying with that? How that self-care plan works? Okay. Okay, I think that's about it. That's all I have. Well, that's not all I have, but that's all I have for now.
And when hey, thank you, Shannon. And let's give Shannon a big round of applause. And Dr. Currington, Hey, thank you for this. And it just reminded me, as a high school principal, there was this young man that was, he was saying to me and the assistant principal, I'm not gonna be nothing. Why y'all worrying about me? I'm a nobody, and when that had been ingrained in him so much that he thought that he was a nobody, that's like, why are you all taking time with me? And so many of our kids, they feel that way. They feel like they don't matter. And they're just looking for, and he didn't even know how to embrace the love and care that we were showing. And we had to reel them in to be able to say, yes, you are someone. And many times it happens to people who are very close to them. And so, and it can happen from the parents or people who they live with, but it also can happen from that classroom teacher as well. So we have to be mindful of what we say to kids, what we say to people every day, because as you stated, words do matter. And all too often we say, oh, well, it's no big deal. Like sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can never harm you. And we remember words from 25, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, as if it was just yesterday. And so that is so, so important. And when you talk about the different levels of care, and many times right now, when I was in school, I had health and PE every day. And many times these kids don't get it, And so when you talk about your natural ability is to move. But when you're asking people to sit and get, so that means they're bottling up all of that emotional, that energy that can be used in other ways. And so what happens is they bottle it all up. And then when they burst, sometimes it comes out very negative, just because they have not been able to release some energy. But how do you get beyond that in helping and supporting and showing that love and care? And also know, as educators, every day is a new day. We can't hold on to what happened yesterday, because I can remember kids, and I will say after whatever they was dealing with or did, I said, I love you anyway. You don't love me, but they knew that. But because you say that to them, because if you hold on to that, then you're just as guilty, as they are, for whatever infraction that they did. But you, the adult, what is your responsibility? What is your duty? And why are you in this business? So, Shannon, when you mentioned about the different levels of the 8 different areas of self-care that's needed and necessary, we can't emphasize that enough, to individuals that take care of your mental and physical well-being. And sometimes that means saying no to people, to say, not at this time, because we can overwhelm ourselves to the point of exhaustion, where our patience is very short with people, with family, or even with ourselves. And for females, we take care many times of everyone else but us. And we put ourselves on the back burner. And we have to stop doing that, and say that self matters. We matter in the grand scheme of things. And we don't do that enough, as women. So we have to do that. So we're talking about, pointers and things that, strategies that people can take away with them. Then, family, friends, relationships, how do you continue to emphasize to individuals the need for self-care? That is not just a buzzword, and we're hearing it now. Oh, self-care, but what is, how do you emphasize that enough to individuals that their lives do matter? What else can we say? That's a question for both of y'all. What else can we say to individuals that to make them understand that this is real? And when we see the violence in our society, those people are mad and angry. Some of them don't even know why, then all of these is being manifested in our world today. So how can we emphasize it? What can you say to the audience if they can take back or even work in the spaces and places that they occupy, that the importance of self-care?
I would just say this, not so much, self-care is hands down, but as far as to the audience, I have learned to look through the lens of trauma, okay? Because the vast majority of mental health issues are rooted in trauma. Anytime you're talking about addiction, suicide, depression, disordered eating, anything like anxiety, a lot of times the root causes, because those are just actions and symptoms, right? But the root causes are trauma, okay? So when you look at situations or people or individuals through the lenses of trauma, the thing is not what makes them do that, it's why, what's going on. Like the insurrection, the uprisings of 2020, we don't ask the questions of why. Why? When you start asking, you have to become naturally curious about people and circumstances and situations, not judging, right? But asking why. What makes them act, what's going on, what makes them act that way? Again, you're talking to someone who's forever interested in the story behind a person, place, or thing. So I peel back the layers. So the insurrection wasn't just an insurrection. There are so many whys tied to that. And those whys are typically, we never talk about those things, right? So when we don't talk about things and we don't acknowledge things, we don't acknowledge trauma from generation to generation, from decade to decade, the 2020 uprisings, that's what you have. Like the mass shooting, that's what you have. It compounds over time. So when you start looking at things through a trauma lens, and that's just saying you're considering that there's something behind the action. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. There's something behind the action. It's not just an act. A criminal is not just a criminal, right? Mm-hmm. There's something behind that. Mm-hmm. And if we can treat what's going on behind it, then you don't have to worry about the criminal activity or the crime because it'll take care of itself. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. The second thing I would say is, and this is just kind of like a side note for individuals, never underestimate the power of physical activity. Okay? Physical activity, regular and consistent physical activity, releases the happy juice in your head. It just does. It is a fact. Now, I have a listing of the chemicals, but of course I can't remember them right off. But just know that happy juice is released in your head when you're physically active. And I know this not just because I read it and I've studied it and I've researched it. I know this because this is one of my own practices for the past 12 years in dealing with stress. Some of it clears my head. And listen, I'm a fluffy gal. So, you know, I'm not doing that level of physical. I'm not running. I will walk, but I'm not running. I'm not even walking that fast, but it clears my head. Okay. And some of my best ideas or some of my greatest insights come from either during or after physical activity, because that's a chemical process is going on. Does that make sense? Okay. So those are two of the things that I would recommend: looking at individuals or groups of people through a lens of trauma, and never underestimate physical activity as a regular part of your daily routine.
And something I will say is to also evaluate what your relationship is with yourself, right? How do you view yourself? That's very important because, you know, the saying is you can't pour from an empty cup. So you can't serve and do this work of social justice and social change if you don't understand what your relationship is with yourself, or you don't understand what your triggers may be and how you can be able to help and heal yourself and the people that you are serving. Is very, very important. Throughout my research, I would have to take breaks because there was so much tension in the world, and I'm researching racial trauma. And so it was very important for me to pause, take those breaks, learn what was beneficial for me to ground myself. And sometimes that was taking a walk. Sometimes it was having people pour into me because I had nothing else to give. And so it's very important to start examining your relationship with yourself so that you are able to help others.
And once you you surround yourself with good people, positive people, because it's going to be days where you're going to have to lean on someone, and it's going to be days you have to lift someone. And so it's good to be able to have a balance of people around you that's when you're vulnerable, that they're not judging you, that they're able to lift you, and keep you moving. And on those days, and it's going to be days when you need to lift them, but being able to have that balance and know that we're not the superwoman. We don't have the S on our chest. And many times we think we have to be hard, we have to be tough, we have to tough it out. And we don't have to, we don't have to carry those labels or wear those labels. It's okay to be the fluffy girl, it's okay to smile and have someone to cater to you, and all too often, we don't get that because we don't want that because we're tough, we're in a fight, but we don't have to be the fight. Yes, we know there's a lot of things going on, but we don't have to have our boxing gloves on every day, all day. We can take them off and know when and when not to, because that's going to be the key to your mental and your physical health. Any questions from the audience that
I see something in the chat. It says, seems like trauma is endemic to this society. How can our institution or our organization deal with the need? Mm-hmm. That's where you go into the macro practices. It's never going to be solved on an individual basis because there are systemic issues that perpetuate the trauma, if that makes sense. Okay, so when you see an increase of homeless people living under the expressways, I live downtown. So I've been downtown for the past 12 years. So in my area, 6 years ago, there were no homeless people living under the expressways. But when you start considering the revitalization or the gentrification of certain areas, and those people move out, where do they go? Can they afford to move back in? And if they can't, what happens then? Okay, so start looking at systemic, like addressing the systemic issues that creates this trauma on an individual level, if that makes sense, as an organization. And I would say that comes with some educating and some organizing, and then some lobbying politically. Now, I know that can't be done on a university level, but certainly when it comes to like private citizens, it can be done because these issues of trauma are not individual, they're systemic. Does that make sense?
But also know that when we talk about civil rights and different things, it didn't happen. It happened with young people. So it can be the beginnings of it can happen, in a high school, or it can happen on a college campus where people come together and say and be able to share their student voice in differently because it's not, a lot of the elderly people, they, concerned about their job and different things. And so sometimes they just don't. But the civil rights began with young people saying this is not right. When we saw the protests last summer, there was a lot of people out there from all persuasions, and people were shocked, like, oh my goodness, because they saw what was happening and the injustice that was manifested across this country. And it's real. So it can, you have your BSU, your Black Student Unions, or your organizations, the LGBTQ or social justice. I mean, those things can start in those areas. And as you stated that 6 years ago, you didn't see that many homeless people out. 6 years ago, we didn't have the kind of violence in Jefferson County that we have now. It was like, what happened? But over time, because when you don't address situations, then they continue to grow and manifest. And people say, well, what happened? Well, we've been slowly getting there, because when you push kids out of school, when you push them out and you lock them out, then this is where we are. And so when we see some of the things that we see, it didn't happen overnight. It's a direct correlation of all of these institutions and what's happening and how we are treating people. And one the person indicated that Cynthia about surrounding yourself with positive people. I've had to realize at different times that I was more of a friend to some other people than they were to me. I was pouring into them, and when I needed it, it wasn't there. So you have to be mindful of the people that you're around as well. And not because, again, some days you're going to need someone. And when they're never there, like, whoa, wait a minute, and you always there, you have to be mindful of, is it just a taking? And so you have to be mindful of who you're around and who you surround yourself around. And do they want you there for a reason? Or is it a true relationship if it's a give and take? So all of those things play into our mental psychic as well, and our mental and physical well-being, because again, we all have days where we're going to need someone. And do we have the right people surrounding us to be able to pour into us as we pour into them?
And I will go back to the K-12 thing. There is power in teaching students how to advocate for themselves and what that looks like for them, right? And so I will go back to student voice, whether that's K-12 or higher ed, and teaching them to figure out which ways is important and how to advocate and communicate for themselves is very, very important. In my absence, my students still reached out, and we still processed and talked about the chain of command on how to advocate for themselves in these systems that were not built for them. And so, not everybody is meant to be out there holding a sign, right, and protesting. But what does advocacy and social justice and learning how to express what they need for themselves, what does that look like for them? And learning how to teach them to figure that out and process that out, and just being that soundboard and being that safe, trusted adult, right, that allows our students to make important decisions. They are our future. And so we have to teach them. So it's so important.
Absolutely. And I enjoyed my time as a BSU person, Black Student Union advocate at the district level, because, I want them to know that, how to, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. And being able to teach them how to go through systems, and also, what's the end result? We want to change policies, because that's where the laws and the power, that's what we can look at the change, because we can talk all day long, but what's going to be the action plan? What's going to be the result of the plan? And what's going to be the result of, and that, again, all that goes into your mental and physical health, and how you deal with all of it. What is the action plan? What are you going to do about it? how are you going to make sure that you get things? And I'm one of these ENTJ people, y'all know the acronyms. It's like, and something's bugging me. I have to discuss it. I have to get it off of me, because if not, then, I just have to, and some people will hold that in, but I know that I need to release it, so I go to wherever the source is, and again, be able to say it in a diplomatic way, but I need to be able to let you know what it is, and because sometimes you have people who are bigots and showcase negativity to people. No one ever checks them. No one ever checks it. Just say, well, you know how so-and-so is. You know how Shannon is. You know how Diane is. And so Diane and Shannon never know that they're offending someone, because no one ever checks them. So we just have to be able to be mindful of the trauma, and as Shannon indicated, trauma comes in so many different forms. And we just have to be mindful of that, of the mental and physical well-being of all of us. And like someone said, holding people accountable for their actions. You just can't say anything to me and think it's okay. You can't just talk to our kids in any type of way and think that it's okay. It is not okay, and what they say, treat people as you want to be treated. Then sometimes we have to model that, and we have to let people know that it's not acceptable. So any other questions from the audience? I want to thank Dr. Currington. I want to thank Shannon Floyd for their work, but also some parting words for our audience, because anything else that we want to leave them with, because again, go where you want to go with it, because we talk and we'll talk. Any parting words? Don't hesitate, it's okay. We saw this in the public schools this week. Young and old need to recognize triggers. Thank you for sharing and helping others. Absolutely. There was a situation at Moore High School with a young man who was, he experienced PTSD and when the teacher tells him, oh, you're going to be like one of those black boys who get shot, okay, that triggered him because he had been shot the year before. And so, yes, he exerted energy, then hit the adult, and then the adult lost it, and began to pull and, forgot that he was the adult, So you have all those things going on, and why would you even say it to a kid? And so, again, accountability. But from what I understand, he was able to go and teach the rest of the day. I'm like, how does that happen?
Well, and it goes back to checking what your biases are, right? And the microaggressions that happens within our school systems, right? And so and it goes back to building relationships. If that teacher would have had a relationship with that student or relationship with other colleagues, that teacher would have known that wasn't a statement. One, you shouldn't be saying a student's period, no matter what color they are. And two, they would have known what their history was. And so we are not taking the time to communicate with each other. We're not taking the time to get to know our children and what that looks like for them. And so stuff like this makes me angry, right? But what am I doing with this anger? And so this is the work that I live in, to keep educating and keep hoping people start to listen and love on our kids a little bit better than what we're doing. We also have to think about our school as a system, right? And we gotta line up. We gotta wear uniforms. We gotta do all these things that oftentimes make them feel so confined and like they have no room to grow and be who they truly are. And so how do we support those safe environments, within our schools? So for me, the school may not have been safe for a lot of my Black and brown students, but guess what? My classroom was, right? And so that was the space they could come and let it all go and be who they truly are. And so sometimes you can't break down the whole system overnight, right? Sometimes it's just your space in your area. And what are you doing with that?
Absolutely. We all can do something in the spaces and places that we occupy. Then we talk about the young ladies, the cheerleaders at Ballard High School, that was told that we can raise some money for you to get some extensions and some sew-ins and some different things. And so those things, but how do we go about having those courageous conversations?
you can't be scared, right? You cannot be scared. Change is uncomfortable, and sometimes you are standing by yourself. And so I had to get to a space where I was no longer scared to say what I need to say in order to support the students and the people that I'm advocating for, right? And sometimes that means that I have to leave those institutions and remove myself from those institutions, right? And take care of myself first so I can go back in with a different lens and a different title or whatever else needs to be to still do the work that I know needs to be done. And so it's okay to say, I've had enough and I have to take care of myself. But it's also okay to stand by yourself if you're advocating with students, regardless of how other people feel.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Shannon, how do we have those courageous conversations?
How do you have those courageous conversations?
Mm-hmm.
Go scared. I agree with Dr. Currington.
Mm-hmm.
Courage is not the absence of fear. It's persevering in spite of the fear. I live my life in that. And being very clear about, potential consequences or losses. Mm-hmm. And I'll say this is the last parting word for me. Your mind is your greatest asset, not your physical body, your mental and in your emotional health, your greatest asset. This is what's going to get you out of everything. If this is hindered, you're hindered. Does that make sense? If this is hindered, you're hindered. This is your greatest asset right here. Protect it, care for it, love it.
Well, hey, I want to thank you all for I guess beginning this conversation at the beginning of the 21-22 school year, because it needs to happen and will continue to happen, especially in my world. And so I will empower everyone who's here, have the courage to be able to say what needs to be said, to stand up, and be counted for, and to not live in fear. But we have to have the courage to do that. And I was in a meeting with some assistant principals a couple of weeks ago, and I asked them, do you have the courage, or you need the courage, because those kids are going to be walking back into school buildings. And do you have the courage to help them through all the pandemics that we're dealing with, in this school year? And if not, let's do some self-reflecting on who you are as a person. Who are you? Like I said, what is your why? Why are you here? So again, I want to thank you all for joining me today. I want to thank the panelists, and that's all we have. And
I want to say one thing though. Make sure these environments are safe for you too, right? Because sometimes these environments are not safe for you, and so find those people outside of these, outside of your institutions to help support you if it feels unsafe to support those students.
Because what happens is the students are saying, who's standing up for us? Who has our back? Where are our advocates? And many times we talk at students and not to students. And we looking at them from the deficit mindset of as to what they can't do as opposed to what they can do. And there's so much talent out there, and there's so much that they can do. But we have to be able to give them the opportunity and the platform and the voice to be able to showcase their talents and be able to lift them every day. But we can't lift them if we don't have the courage to be able to stand up and say, no, I can't allow you to do this to these kids today. Not on my watch. So I want to thank everyone for coming, and that's all we have. Any questions or